If you're tired of overgiving, of shrinking yourself to be chosen, of feeling like love, peace, or abundance is something you have to earn, I want you to know this. You're not broken. You're just unpracticed in believing you matter. There is a way to live differently, and this is exactly why I created You Matter, an 8-week, soul-deep course to help you remember your worth, reclaim your power, and rewrite every relationship in your life, starting with the one you have with yourself. Enrollment is now open. You can find more information on my website, www.lindsaymorlock.com. Come walk with me on this journey, and I'll show you how your worthiness was never up for debate. The world is waking up, and you finding your way here today is no coincidence. The spirit world always has a way of guiding us where we most need to be at the absolute perfect time. I'm your host, Lindsay Morlock, and you're listening to the Guided Podcast, where we explore how the spirit world works on our behalf to guide us along our paths. This is where you'll learn how to live a life that is both conscious and connected, so you can supercharge your pathway to healing and open to life's magic and miracles. Come along this journey to see how guided you truly are. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Guided Podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay Morlock. And last week in part 1, I shared a realization, that heavy ache that sets in when someone you care about can't or won't see your growth, when they really don't know you, when they never really did, when they couldn't see your self-worth or the more vulnerable, authentic version of you that was trying so hard to emerge. They couldn't see how the role you once played in their life was no longer who you were becoming. I wanted this person to see those things, to see me beyond the version of myself that once fit so neatly into her world, but she couldn't. And I felt hurt by that pain of not being seen while you're changing and growing and becoming. It's real. It's this ache of wanting someone to witness your shift, to acknowledge the evolution. And when they can't or don't, it's devastating. I was going to move into part 2 this week, the integration piece, but Spirit nudged me to pause and come back to this moment, because this is the messy middle. This is the part of the journey that so many of us try to skip past, but it's where the truth lives. So here's the truth I want to name today. When we stay silent in relationships, when we don't speak up about what we're truly feeling, about not being seen, about not feeling safe or appreciated, there is a cost. And the cost of our silence is clarity. In this particular relationship, what began as a smaller rupture eventually unraveled into something much bigger. And the truth is, it wasn't until after that bigger rupture that happened months later that I finally found the capacity to speak my full truth. But getting to that point wasn't instant. It wasn't graceful, and it certainly wasn't tidy. To speak my truth with clarity and integrity, without the emotional edge, without any reactive charge, I had to go silent for 2 months. For 2 entire months, I said nothing. I left this person in the dark, not to be cruel, but because I needed that much time to process every layer, every edge, every ache, every single pain. And I felt like I needed to learn every possible thing I could about myself and my patterns, so that when I did finally speak, I could show up not only for me, but also with great respect for them. Not to be perfect, but to be honest, to be energetically clean and grounded. And when I did finally speak, it came in the form of an email. It was a letter I poured my entire heart into. In this letter, I took responsibility for my part. I named the pain I felt. I named the distance. I named why it took me so long to circle back. I named what I had learned and took accountability for my own mistakes. And I was proud of that letter. I still am, because it was real. It was honest. It was sincere. And it came from a place of such love for this person and how much this relationship meant to me. But it took the full 8 weeks, and not a day sooner, for me to be able to show up in that way. Energetically clean, clear, and in full integrity and authenticity, fully processed within myself and deeply aware of where I believed the breakdown had occurred. So it took me 8 weeks to get to the point where I could send this letter. So I sent the letter, and 2 days later, I received a response. It was a short, professional email, 2 paragraphs long. No apology was extended. No ownership or personal accountability was taken. No intimacy or explanation offered. And it was without a single gesture of empathy for the pain that I had named in my own experience. And the letter closed with a formal goodbye, wishing me well, and walking away from the relationship entirely. And I sat there reading this letter, absolutely stunned, because I had taken so much care. I had worked so hard to be energetically clean in my communication, to be in personal integrity. I took great self-responsibility for my side of the road. And in the end, none of it changed the outcome. Just a goodbye, walking away from our relationship. And when I received that email and was in such disbelief, I actually realized it was because, like I shared in the last episode, that fantasy bond had me convinced that this person was someone different than the person who showed up in my inbox. That email in my inbox that day was the confirmation and the clarity that I didn't want, but I deeply needed. That my lack of emotional safety in this relationship was real. That my body had been telling me the truth all along. My intuition had been right to feel fearful and afraid every time I tried to speak up because the emotional safety wasn't there. And I share this because after everything, I never got to have a real conversation with this person about anything that ever happened. Not a two-way one. By the time I was able to show up with my truth, this person was already gone. That door had already been closed. I just didn't know it. And that's part of the ache too, when you realize repair isn't possible, even when you finally find your voice. And so the mess of this is that I think when relationships end, we always have this natural shoulda, woulda, coulda, right? Like, what if I had said this sooner? What if I had named this? What if I had called attention to this in real time instead of waiting until I was fully processed? Because the truth is, how can someone really see you if they don't even know how you're feeling? And so for me, I've learned that when we don't feel emotionally safe to speak up in relationships, we hold back, we shrink, we diminish our truth because we're feeling like we're going to somehow preserve the connection by not speaking up. But that's not actually what happens. When we don't speak up, we're just delaying our own clarity, which is why silence comes with such a high cost, because we stay in dynamics for far longer than we should, when ultimately the cost is really high because we continue to suffer the more we continue not to speak. Now, on the flip side, when relationships end and there's all of these questions left swirling in your mind, it's because all of this is left unresolved within you. I started wondering, if I had spoken up sooner, would it have changed the outcome? Was this relationship ever real? Was the love ever real? Did I really make all of this up in my mind? How did I allow myself to be duped like this? Did I ever matter beyond the things I did for this person? But for me, I also had to get really honest with myself because it was very difficult for me to speak up for myself in this relationship. It was difficult for me to stand up for myself in this relationship. I always felt a lot of fear around speaking up in our dynamic. And if you think about it, and the story that I told last week about how I finally had the courage to speak my need to be included in decisions that affected me, that was a need that felt simple to me, that didn't feel like a big ask. And so when that need was essentially denied and deflected, that didn't create emotional safety within me to keep leaning into these bigger issues or what felt like harder conversations. And while I now know how important it is to speak up regardless of how someone else potentially responds, I also want to name that it doesn't feel safe to speak up in dynamics where emotional safety doesn't exist. And I want to name that explicitly because we need to pay more attention to our bodies and what our bodies are communicating with us with regard to what feels emotionally safe in relationships and what doesn't. My body was always telling me that I didn't feel safe in this dynamic, but I kept overriding it because my mind attached to the fantasy. But ultimately, if we don't have emotional safety, we're not going to feel empowered or trusting enough to speak up. And when that lack of safety is confirmed by someone else's response, it only deepens the fear that it's not safe to be ourselves. Our body gives us that feedback. It tells us where there is safety and where there is not. And when we really start listening to that and honoring that, everything starts to shift. Because while my knees might still knock in relationships where safety does exist, I recognize now that it does not take me the same energy to speak up. I don't feel the same level of paralysis that I felt in this previous dynamic. And this is why this part of becoming feels so hard sometimes, because you have the tools, you're doing the work, you're taking responsibility for your side of the road, and you're employing everything you've got in real time, but still, you're in it. You're in the thick of it. You're in the mess of it. So I made a choice to honor what was true, and I left this home. I didn't leave in anger. I left with integrity. But even after I moved out of the house and into my own place, I still longed for the connection that I had deeply desired all along. I still wanted to fix this, and I just redirected my pattern. Because the truth is, I didn't stop striving when I moved out. I didn't stop over-functioning when I left this person's house. I just shifted my over-functioning into a different form. So I may have stopped doing acts of service inside the house, but I was still emotionally laboring for this relationship. And the emotional laboring that I was engaging in was taking radical self-responsibility for understanding me, my patterns, my emotions, trying to perfect myself. And then I realized I was taking full responsibility for not just my side of the road, but for the other person's side of the road as well. So I was now taking full responsibility for both sides of the dynamic, thinking, if I just healed enough, if I just grew enough, if I just understood enough and got clear enough what this was for me, what this was for them, and what this was for both of us, maybe that level of consciousness and integrity could create the connection that I always longed for. And I remember sitting in my new place one night and saying to Spirit, I am willing to do whatever it takes to create the connection with this person that I so deeply long for. I will feel every ache. I will work through every piece of my wounding. I will change myself if that's what it takes to repair this relationship. I was still trying to preserve the connection by managing it from the inside out, still trying to fix it through my own evolution. But I can see now how I just transferred the pattern. I can see how my worthiness wound was still playing out. It was dressed up now in spiritual language. I was still trying to earn love through self-abandonment, still thinking that if I cleaned myself up, if I was healed enough, that maybe, just maybe, they'd come back. But relationships don't work like that. Relationships take two invested, committed people. And a healing dynamic doesn't mean fixing both sides alone. I was responsible for my side of the road and my side alone. So yes, I thought about what it would be like to sit at a table with her and name all of this. I fantasized about a repair conversation where we'd be able to dive into what we both learned individually and collectively and would be able to start a new foundation, a new friendship based on mutual trust, respect, and understanding. A relationship truly built around mutuality and equal partnership. I had fantasies of this connection being born again through that vulnerability and through that honesty. But it never happened, and that's okay, because what I now know is that had I spoken up sooner, I don't think the outcome would have actually changed. What I now know is that I would have found clarity sooner. And in that, I may have suffered less. I may have stopped contorting myself for a connection that was never going to hold me. And that clarity, that was the gift. That clarity was the closure. And here's the thing I want to say, because I feel it's important. I see all the ways that I contributed to this dynamic and our faulty foundation. I see the ways that I stayed silent. I see the ways I tried to manage everything through effort. I see the ways that I kept hoping that they'd read between the lines. And I beat myself up for a long time for my own mistakes in this relationships, leaving them in the dark for 2 months while I tried to come back into emotional integrity. I regret that. For all the micro moments I chose not to speak my truth. And I beat myself up for a while about those things. But I don't beat myself up for those things anymore. I've forgiven myself because that version of me was truly trying her best. And I know that with every ounce of my being. She was learning. She was scared. She was protecting herself. And that girl felt so deeply betrayed and hurt. She actually thought that speaking up might be an act of self-betrayal. And so that girl stayed silent until she had the clarity to know what to do without that emotional charge. That version of me, she was still waking up in the thick of the messiness. And I really believe that Spirit meets us in our process. I now know with every part of me that our missteps are part of the learning. And I don't need to carry shame for the ways that I didn't know better yet. I learned my lessons, and I took great responsibility, especially the responsibility that was mine to take. And I had to learn not to take more than what was mine. And now that I know better, now I'm applying all of my learning as I move forward. And now I relate differently. Now I'm moving forward differently because I've learned how to stay in integrity with myself. And that is the foundation for every relationship I want to build going forward. So today, I'm in relationships where my mess is met with grace, where there's space for truth, where repair is not just possible, but it's beautiful because both people are in it. And that changes everything. And so this part of the story felt like it needed to be told before we moved forward, before we talked about the integration, before we wrap it all up and tied the bow. Because here's the deeper truth. The bigger worthiness teaching that threads throughout this entire transmission, the soul truth that wraps it all up is this. You don't have to earn the right to speak your truth. Your voice is not a burden. Your feelings are not too much. And you're not unworthy of love just because someone else couldn't meet you in your depth. And you don't have to stay silent simply because someone can't hold your truth. When it comes to silence and emotional safety, the worthiness wound tells you, stay quiet or you'll lose them. Don't rock the boat, just keep giving, let it go. You're only lovable when you're easy or agreeable or perfect. But the truth is, you are worthy of relationships where you don't have to shrink to be safe. You are worthy of being seen before you're polished. You are worthy of being heard before you've made it digestible. And you are worthy of connection that can hold you messy in process and in real time. And when we internalize the belief that love is conditional on our emotional neatness, we silence ourselves in the name of connection. But the connection we're preserving isn't real. It's a performance. And every time we abandon our voice to keep the peace, we slowly abandon our worth. And perhaps a deeper teaching here is that emotional safety isn't something you earn by being perfect. It's something you discern based on how your truth is received. Let me say that again. Emotional safety isn't something you earn by being perfect. It's something you discern based on how your truth is received. And in relationships where safety doesn't exist, your worthiness is not what is in question. The capacity of the container is. when you finally make the decision to stop abandoning yourself just to keep a door open, and you realize that that door only ever led you further away from your truth, something shifts. Because that's when you understand it was never your silence that was the problem. It was never your voice that was too much. The problem was actually that the container couldn't hold what you had the courage to say. And now I know that. And now I speak because my truth matters, because I matter. And so do you, because being seen isn't a luxury, it's your birthright. And when you finally believe that you matter, you stop begging for crumbs and finally start reclaiming the feast. You rise, you speak, and you lead yourself all the way back to your truth, and you never hand it over again. So next week, for real this time, we're moving into part 2, where we integrate it all: the clarity, the ache, the becoming, and ultimately the shift into reclamation. I'll meet you there. Bye for now. Thank you so much for listening to the Guided Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would be so grateful if you would share it with a friend or even leave me a review so we can ensure that it makes its way into the ears of listeners who need to hear these messages most. Until next time, may you remember how guided you truly are.